Hello, this is cjhoyle. Today is Saturday, August the 14th, 2021, and today I'm riding here in the Yonge Eglinton neighborhood on a street called Erskine Avenue. And in this video, I'm going to be revisiting my former daily bike commute, starting from here on Erskine Avenue and heading up to the Yonge and Sheppard neighborhood. I apologize if there's an excess of wind on the microphone. In this area of Yonge Eglinton, there's a lot of high-rise buildings, which creates a fair bit of a wind tunnel effect along some of the streets, but I'll shortly be getting away from here and mostly riding through residential single-family home neighborhoods to get there. So the street up ahead is Yonge Street, and essentially the route that I take to get from work follows the pathway of Yonge Street, but I didn't used to ride on Yonge Street itself most of the way to work. So from here at Erskine Ave, I'm going to just take a quick right turn on Yonge Street, but I'm going to be making a left turn at this next intersection up ahead, which is called Castlefield Avenue, and I'll pick things back up on the other side of Yonge Street on a street called Duplex. And it looks like we've got a red light here that we've got to wait for. So underneath of Yonge Street here, there's a subway line which runs from all the way downtown up as far as Finch Avenue in North York. And so in the days when I did this commute, I had the option of riding my bike, which is what I did about 99% of the time, but there is also a subway that I could take to get to work, which runs right underneath of here. I lived within walking distance of Eglinton subway station, and my work was very close to Sheppard Yonge subway station. So just making a left turn here, now that I got my green light, and I'm heading right now in the west direction, but like I said, I'm going to be turning right again and continuing in the north direction, following along parallel to Yonge Street. And as soon as you cross over here to this side of Yonge Street and start going north, all the high-rise buildings that dominated the area where I started with, there's no more of those around here. It's all just single-family homes. So I moved to the Yonge and Eglinton neighborhood in April of 2013, and I moved away from that apartment towards the beginning of 2016, and all the while I worked at the same office up in North York, and like I said, 99% of the time my bike was the way that I got to work, so I'm very familiar with this route. Although I haven't done it particularly recently. I mean, it's been more than 5 years since it was a daily thing for me, but following that, I still ended up doing things up and around these areas and ended up riding my bike to get to them. I now live further downtown in a neighborhood known as the Annex. And while after I moved, I continued to commute a longer distance to the same office, a few years later, the company decided to close that office. So I'm no longer commuting there, and I'm practically entirely home-based now. For the last 4 years, when I tell people that I work from home, they assume it's because of the pandemic, but no, I was working from home before it was cool.
All the staff from LB3 are...
All right, just crossing Lytton Boulevard here. This neighborhood that we're riding through is known as Lytton Park. And I guess it's sort of centered around that Lytton Boulevard, one of the central streets through it. Now, one of the unfortunate things about Duplex for a commuting route is that there's a lot of intersections, and nearly all of them have four-way stops like that. So there's a lot of starting and stopping on your bike. So back in those days when this is my daily bike commute, that was around the time that I started making narrated bike riding videos like the one that you're seeing right now. And I decided that filming my route to and from work was a fun subject matter that I could pretty easily do on a, you know, one of my work days. And for a couple of years I sort of had a goal of filming one bike commuting video to work each month. So for every calendar month I wanted to have a bike commuting video. I didn't, you know, I missed a couple of months along the way, but I'm sure there's at least 12 of them. I'm sure I got like the entire year covered, including days when there was crazy amounts of snow and days when it was really cold, and I think I filmed one when it was raining, and really kind of my goal with those videos was to hopefully show people how enjoyable bike commuting can be, and hopefully encourage some others to try doing it. We're just passing over the Burke Brook, which is a buried former sort of creek, and this is known as the Chatsworth Ravine. But they built duplex, sort of elevated it here, so there's no gully to go up and down. I really enjoyed bike commuting. It is something that I miss about my days when I worked in an office compared to working from home. It was always very satisfying arriving at work each morning, having already completed about 30 minutes of exercise. And you know, it also was sort of a way of waking myself up. Like, you know, even if I hadn't gotten an awful lot of sleep the night before after, you know, doing exercise for 30 minutes, when I arrived at work, I was always feeling very alert and awake and ready to start working. And then at the end of the day, you know, I had my bike ride home to always look forward to. And then when I would get home, I would have completed, you know, another 30 minutes of exercise. So I already had, you know, an hour of cardio in my day. And the idea of going to a gym or something like that in the evening wasn't really relevant. I felt like I already had my exercise and I didn't really even have to think about it. So we're at Lawrence Avenue here, and north of Lawrence Avenue, Duplex Avenue changes names. That's the road that I'm riding on, and it becomes known as Jedburgh Road or Jedburgh. I've heard it pronounced both ways. Spelled Jedburgh. Lawrence Avenue is a relatively busy east-west street from here. And just to the east of here, at Yonge Street, that's where the Lawrence subway station is. There's quite a big gap between the Eglinton subway station and the Lawrence subway station. As the subway goes further north, they space the stations out further apart. And the condition of the asphalt on this road is certainly not the best. It never really was. I remember at one point they redid the water mains on Duplex, so they were digging up all kinds of roadway to do that work. And I was hopeful that they would pave over it after the fact, and I suppose they have repaved certain sections of it. This is Woburn Avenue. And something that I remember when I used to do this commute was that there was a big difference between days when school was in session and days when it wasn't. I always remember like the first day of after the Labor Day long weekend, the Tuesday, when all the kids would go back to school. Duplex would have, it seemed like, double the amount of cars on it. And that's because so many kids in this part of the city get driven to school by their parents. And they used to notice the same thing at March break in Canada, or at least in Ontario. I think probably most of Canada. There's a week in March when all the kids have a week off school. And I remember I'd be riding to work and I would, the first day of that week, I'd go, wow, where did all the cars go? Because all the kids weren't going to school anymore for that week.
Take it.
One thing I always liked about riding on Duplex compared with Yonge Street was just how sort of flat and gradual the hill was. Usually when you're heading in the north direction in Toronto, you're heading away from the lake, which means you're heading up a hill. And that's true with Yonge Street. There are a couple of dips and valleys along the way as well, but for the most part, this part of my commute was just sort of a gradual uphill. But I really like how Duplex and Jedburgh just kind of smooth that out, and you're not, not doing any of what I call unnecessary hills. Or in other words, hills when you're going down and you're going right back up the other side. All right, so I'm just gonna make a right turn here at Deloraine Avenue, and that will take me back over to Yonge Street. And from here I'll be crossing to the other side, and we'll be riding through a neighborhood known as Hogs Hollow. And I'm actually going to cut through this bank parking lot here to get over to the next street, which is called Yonge Boulevard. And Yonge Boulevard intersects with Yonge Street. So I'm going to be making a left turn at the intersection of Yonge and Yonge. And once again, I'll be on Yonge for a very short little section here, and then I'll be riding on neighborhood streets again over on the other side of Yonge Street. Straight ahead is the Loblaws supermarket store. And I believe that building that the Loblaws sits in used to be a building that was used by the TTC's streetcar line, or at least that property was formerly used for that. I don't know whether the actual building has been reused. But before there was a subway underneath of Yonge Street, there used to be a streetcar that was at grade level that came up to there, and that's where it turned around. So I'm just going to make a right turn onto Donwoods Road, or Donwoods Drive. And I used to always feel like when you came down this road, it felt like you were very far away from the city of Toronto. It feels more like you're in sort of cottage country, just the way that there's sort of a steep hill and there's no sidewalks, and the driveways are all long and windy, and Just feels very isolated from the rest of the city. So we got a nice hill to go down. We're heading down to the bottom of the Hogs Hollow Valley. Now back in the days when I used to film my narrated bike rides down this road, I often would put a speedometer and a heart rate monitor stats on the screen so you could see how fast I was going, and it was always fun on that hill to see how much speed I picked up, although it's kind of inconvenient with that stop sign sort of partway down. So I'm just gonna make a left turn here now onto Danino. And so at the bottom of this valley, this is where the West Don River flows, and we'll be passing underneath of that, or passing over top of that at this little bridge that's just up ahead. And now that we're down at the very bottom of this valley, it means that we've got to climb back up the other side, and we've got quite a steep hill. I mean, basically we're going to gain all that elevation that we just lost. And then a little bit more too, because we are heading further north. This is called Brookfield Road if you go to the right, and Mills Street if you go to the left. And this neighborhood here is called the Hogs Hollow neighborhood. It's a very affluent community with lots of very fancy looking, nice, giant houses. And we'll make our way up this hill here. Danino has changed names. This is now Old Yonge Street that we're riding on. We're going to head up to the right here. And I know the camera doesn't always do the best at illustrating the grade here, but if my speed is any indication of it, you can see that we're going quite slow, and it's quite steep. And the hill just seems to go on forever. And I remember the first time I did this, I thought, oh my gosh, this is a huge hill. But the more you do it, the more you get used to it, and I usually found that if I tried to think about something when I was climbing the hill, it made it go by faster. Because if you just sit there thinking about the hill the whole time, you'll never get to the top. So like I said, I used to do this every day in the morning and every day in the evening in the other direction. And it was a great way of getting my cardio in every day. And of course, these are kind of optimal conditions today, being that it's a nice summer day, maybe a little bit hot. Probably the best temperature to do this would be around maybe 16 or 17 degrees Celsius, when you can do it in a shorts and t-shirt without getting too sweaty. But of course I did it in the winter too. There's a video of me climbing that hill in a snowstorm. I always had that subway as my alternate option of a way to get to work, but I was really pretty stubborn about not using it. I really wanted to ride my bike to work any day that it was possible to do it. Alright, so up ahead we're going to be crossing York Mills Road, which if you were to turn to the left, you'd go down the hill again to the Hogs Hollow Valley, and that's where the York Mills subway station is, which is probably where that bus originated from. And we'll just wait our turn to cross here. Now technically you're not supposed to go straight through this intersection, it's only for turning, but I understand that restrictions there really is intended for motor vehicles. And I think that's because, you know, you get pretty far backed up waiting for your gap in there sometimes, particularly during rush hour. But on a bike, you can let people get past you and you're not holding them up. And I was always very careful to wait for a nice big gap there because it is kind of a dangerous crossing, to be fair. But the alternative is to ride on Yonge Street instead. And I felt that having these nice, quiet neighborhood streets like this with that one crossing was safer than riding a couple of kilometers on Yonge Street instead. Although I did ride on Yonge Street from time to time as well. But at the beginning, I consistently always took this route here. So this road is still called Old Yonge Street that we're on, and I believe back in the day, Yonge Street used to follow this. It wasn't Old Yonge Street, this was Yonge Street. And they straightened it all out eventually, but to do that it required doing quite a bit of excavation and grading to sort of level out the hill and I guess make it less steep for the road to follow along. You'll notice when you go in that section of Yonge Street, it's a very consistent grade pretty well the whole way up. And I don't think that's by accident. I think it was, you know, man-made, modified to be like that. All right, another stop sign. Another stop sign here. This one's called the Links Road, and that's because before this area here was a neighborhood, it actually used to be a golf course. So they built streets over top of the old greenways of the golf course and filled those with houses. That would have been about probably 50 or 60 years ago, I would say. This neighborhood is sort of a combination of houses that are from that era, as well as newer houses which were built on the former lots of the original homes. You can kind of tell the older houses because they look older, but they're also a lot smaller, and the way that the new ones were built were by taking one of those old properties and demolishing the house and putting a much more giant one on top of it. So we're just about at a road called Lord Seaton Road, and we'll make a left turn, and that will take us back towards Yonge Street, but we won't actually be riding on Yonge. We'll be taking a sidewalk pathway which goes underneath of the 401, which is our next major obstacle. So I'll just make a left turn here. And there you can see straight ahead that big concrete structure is one of the bridges for the 401, the underpass for Yonge Street. And I'm going to make a right turn here, but I'm not going to go onto the 401 like the sign says. I'm going to take this sidewalk here, and I'll just wait my turn and cross here and ride on this sidewalk, which technically it is a sidewalk, but it's used much more like a multi-use trail because it is kind of one of the only links between this side of the 401 and the other side. So Highway 401 is a major east-west highway that cuts all the way across southern Ontario from Windsor all the way out to the Quebec border past Cornwall. And I've heard it said before that it's North America's busiest highway. So we're just going to make a right turn up ahead here on a branch of this pathway which leads to the local neighborhood here. And from there I'll sort of make my way up through neighborhood streets on this side of the 401, which will take me up to near the intersection where I used to work. And this is another neighborhood which has lots of high-rises. The corridor along Yonge Street from the 401 up to just a little bit past Finch Avenue is an area that's seen a lot of high-rise development in the last 20 years or so. There are tons of towers, tons of people living in this area. And these towers here are an example of that. When I first started working in this area, that high-rise that's straight ahead at the end of the street, that one was just a construction site, and I watched them gradually build a building there and finish it off, and now there's people living there. There have been for quite a few years now. This road that we're riding on is called Harrison Garden Boulevard, which just ends right here, and we leave this new neighborhood of condos and enter what kind of the former neighborhood that was here used to look like, which are a lot of buildings that were built around the 50s and maybe even the 40s. A lot of them are kind of very similar housing styles. They're the kind of house that's sort of a one story with sort of a half second story, where the roofs are very sloped, so the second story is a lot smaller than the lower story. Just passing Avondale Avenue, and this is Burnwell Avenue that we're riding on right now, and you can see a house being built over on the left. Presumably the original house that was on it was not big enough for the demand, so they built it bigger. Here on the left you can see these houses I was talking about, which have the sloped roof, which has kind of the smaller second floor than first floor. At Glendora Avenue that we're just passing. And I should mention, we're in the former borough of North York, which was amalgamated with the city of Toronto back in 1998. And I guess we've technically been in North York ever since we turned off of, or got past the Loblaws on Yonge Street. That's sort of where the border is, or border was. Making a left turn here. It's called Leona Drive, And at one point, I believe this road used to go all the way through up to Sheppard Avenue, but at some point along the way, they closed a little tiny section of it to make it so that it's a little bit separated from the busier traffic of Sheppard Avenue, and I guess they were trying to stop people from cutting through to get down further south. And from here we're going to take a left turn onto Sheppard Avenue, which will take us heading back in the west direction towards Yonge Street. Just waiting for this person to turn left, and I'll turn left behind them. And I used to work in one of these office towers around here, and one of the best perks of this office was that it had a shower that I could use after I arrived at work, which is really nice. I could keep my office clothes at work, and when I arrived I could have my morning shower and get dressed, and then I was ready to start my work day. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed joining me on this ride down memory lane. If you watched all the way to the end of this video, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.